So, everyone, I want to welcome you to our Lunch and Learn today about enterprise content management. So basically going from paper to digital. I'm real excited about this Lunch and Learn. We have a great crowd. Apparently, I'm not certain how to take this on this end right here. All of you kind of kept your distance from me, but maybe you know some people coming that don't have as good vision. So we've got a great thing today. Usually, we do a lot of these Lunch and Learns, and typically we present and show best practices, maybe share some of our own case studies, but today we're actually going to do something different. We have a client that's come in. He's going to share his own experiences about what they did specifically, so it's going to be a great deal here directly from him, not just us talking about it. As a wrap-up to that, we'll also then be doing a panel discussion where we'll ask some questions, do some Q&A, take some questions from you as well. You can ask any of the people on the panel. But up front, we're also going to kick off with just a couple of mini presentations about who Entrance is, who KnowledgeLake is, and then we'll hand off into the customer case study. Before we go into that, though, I want to go ahead and get the lunch out of the way so we can hear about the great lunch menu that we have planned. And while after that, we'll go around and do some introductions about get an understanding of who you are, what your title is, your firm, and what you're looking to get out of this session.
So I'm Nate Richards. I'm the president of Entrance. We're a software consulting company focused on helping companies take the information in their businesses or government, kind of a business, the business of government, and make better decisions. So how do you close the gap between the data that's already in your company and get it to the users that need it in order to make better decisions? Today's topic is oil and gas paper nightmares. I know there are a few kind of non-exactly oil and gas folks, but we're going to focus today's case study around the oil and gas industry as an industry that has a lot of paper, and talk about how to simplify that move from paper to digital. A little bit background about the company. We're a software consulting company. We help companies buy, build, integrate, customize software systems with a focus on bringing the knowledge of the business as part of what we do. Definitely focus in the oil and gas space. Some of our upstream clients here, you can see we've been around for 10 years, started out in the oil and gas space. One way that we illustrate how it is that we work with companies is many of you have seen sort of a diagram like this of siloed data scattered throughout the company, and then we have our users over here, and people are really unable to access the company's systems. And so another way that we think about this as sort of a strata of information that doesn't allow that information to flow where it really needs to go, where really value can create it. And so we coined this term, frack your data, as a way of thinking about how information flows to the people that need it, and ultimately what we're looking to do is to produce insight. Insight is knowing what to do next, and if you think about how a business iterates on its information, it's really about performing some action which generates some information, and then processing that through a strategy to decide what to do next. And that insight step is really what we're helping companies do with information. We illustrate this for the upstream world on an infographic which shows everything from the COO through operations, drilling, land, reservoir engineering, etc., how each of those different personas are affected by having the right information or the lack of information. And we illustrate that. We have a reservoir of zeros and ones here. That's sort of our reservoir of information. We're sort of tapping into that and helping people get to the information that they need to make better decisions. That's ultimately the so what for working with us, is helping people take the software, put the software tools in place that they need to use the information that's already in their business to make better decisions. So we think about this. Schlumberger did a study of companies that have poor information management practices, and what you can see is more than 75% of the information workers' time, engineers, analysts, accountants, clerks, etc., are spent identifying the information that they need and then preparing it, meaning putting it in the right format, moving it around the company and so forth, and not on analyzing and making decisions. And what we want to do is shift this, right, through good information management practices. And what their study showed is that companies that had good best practices in place, that 85% of their information workers' time were spent on analysis and decision making. And this is really where we create value for our organizations, is in analysis and decision making. And so we feel like good software helps minimize this non-productive time by increasing access to actionable information. right? Not just raw data, but information that you can actually take action as a result of that analysis step. So, as a company, again, our focus is primarily around energy. We're not just a reseller of a product. We don't come in to say, you need to buy this tool. Today, we're partnering with KnowledgeLake because we feel like their tool fits for so many reasons with SharePoint really well, apart from many other records management type of tools. And we're not a staff aug company, but we bring that line of business expertise with us. And because of our high retention of our folks, we're 70 people here in Houston, we're able to put teams in place who've proven before. It means these teams have worked together, delivered solutions together, as opposed to kind of a hodgepodge of independent people that you might get from some other companies. So, and we are headquartered in Houston. So I'll just tee up now. I'm going to introduce Mike Lantzy. He's here as Regional Sales Manager of KnowledgeLake, and hand off to him to kind of do a background on the KnowledgeLake platform, and then he'll introduce kind of our key customer spotlight today with Ron.
Great. Well, thanks for everybody coming today, and it's nice to meet everyone in the room. I just wanted to do a couple quick poll questions of the group. How many of you are using SharePoint today? Okay, so probably 70%. Real quick, what version? 2007, raise your hand. 2010? 2013? Office 365? Dabbling in Office 365. All right, awesome. So everybody here is using SharePoint, fantastic. Anybody here familiar with KnowledgeLake? A little bit. Probably think of us as a scanning company amongst probably many other things, right, depending on who you talk to in the ecosystem. KnowledgeLake essentially has been providing software built on top of SharePoint for 10 plus years. We actually started as a FileNet systems integrator back in the 90s. FileNet Partner of the Year. We didn't like the Capture product. We ended up building a scanning product that was for FileNet and essentially was transitioned to SharePoint back in 2003. Since then, we've grown into an organization, part of the Fujitsu group of companies, largest scanner vendor in the world. And essentially what we bring to the table is a wealth of expertise around transactional content management and records management, both from our heritage and legacy platforms, as well as our expertise in the SharePoint space. So we work with entrants, we work with multiple organizations to help really deliver and drive solutions based on the SharePoint platform that ultimately allow you to have easy to use solutions for your users, as well as better cost effectiveness as you look to deploy it on a common platform in your organization. We'll be touching on Ron here in a minute. Very thankful. We actually have a KnowledgeLake customer here today who also SharePoint as well as physical records management, so he brings a wealth of expertise, and K2 and Nintext. Very active in the SharePoint community. I can't say how thankful we are for him being here today. So with that, just some of the things that you might think about. Today we're going to be talking about digital leases and lease digitization, and maybe we'll touch on some well files. I think somebody had mentioned that they wanted to maybe hear a little bit about that today. But SharePoint is a very horizontal platform. It's both a great thing and it's both not a very great thing depending on how your organization approaches SharePoint, right? Anybody agree with that? Because SharePoint can mean many different things to many different people. Today we are going to define it as a content management platform, meaning that our core purpose for the solution is to take unstructured content, apply structure to it, meaning indexes and things that allow you to manage it and ultimately run it through a records management policy, and make it easy to use and find as part of the user. So as part of that experience, as I tee up Ron here, from an organization perspective and looking at the whole life cycle, and I think you mentioned with Freeport, you guys are already scanning some things, but you might be noticing some gaps in the solution from a usability perspective with out-of-the-box SharePoint, right? So it's how do you use SharePoint as that core platform, take in the scanning part, but outside of that, also address all the different inputs that you might have in your organization, whether it's email, whether it's Excel files that you guys are managing timetables on and schedules and all these things that need to be then surfaced through SharePoint as an end user to make that information actionable. Right? And then how do you tie that together for something that's easy for the user to use? How do you allow them to be empowered without having to call you, or them being empowered without having to search through a bunch of hierarchies of folders? And then ultimately, at the end of the day, how do you effectively match that back to your ERP applications, whether it's P2, whether it's SAP? I think we have some SAP users in the house. And then at the end of the day, how do you then dispose of that in a timely fashion so that you're not open to regulatory risk? All right? Does that summarize kind of why we're all here today? Awesome. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ronald. I'm going to skip one slide here that I don't know how it ended up in there, but it might have been just me. And Ronald's going to go ahead and jump you into, the overall Black Elk Energy story from conception to end. Does this sound good for everyone?
All right.
Excellent.
Okay, good morning. My name is Ron McAdams. This case study was done for Black Elk Energy. We're going to focus mostly on the AP invoice process dealing with finance. This does translate over to well files, land legal, as well as geo files as well. We had that process going and it worked well, but I didn't want to bore you with a ton of detail about how all this worked together. So Black Elk Energy, as you know, is an oil and gas company that produces in the Gulf of Mexico. They are an operator. They were founded in 2009, and it's a company that has been growing their portfolio over the last couple of years. So when I started at Black Elk Energy in 2010, my boss at the time, the VP of IT, was, Ronald, we need to actually make SharePoint our central repository for all of our content. So what this actually meant was taking all of our file shares and migrating this information over into SharePoint. Now, I just come into the process. This was like, whoa, headlights, wait a minute. This is a lot of data to transfer over, because if we're going to transfer it over, we have to make sure that we can manage it, and how can we actually retrieve the data, because we don't want to move data from one location to another location and have the same problem. So I began researching different solutions that we can actually use to say what will work well with SharePoint and what will allow us to better manage our data. Yeah, SharePoint does have out-of-the-box tools using managed metadata tools, which is great, but I need another level on top of that. So when we started looking at the project, we noticed that we had a big decrease in productivity, because as you're going to see if we move forward, is that we had times where it would take 60 plus days to get stuff done in the system, and it was just creating a whole bottleneck of data. And we needed to increase costs. These were all things that were really driving the process. Okay, we need to do something about this. Okay. So what we found was a ton of solutions that worked well with SharePoint. Now, I didn't want to get a solution that just, okay, well, yeah, you can go install it and that's it. I wanted to make sure we got a solution that was going to be fully supported from beginning to end, and that was going to be around for years to come. We already had SharePoint installed in our environment, which was great. We were running 2010 Enterprise Edition. We, at the time, in 2010, were doing a bunch of acquisitions. And so our records management team were currently putting stuff into Excel document worksheets. We needed a better process. So we went out and we found FileTrail, which is a partner with KnowledgeLake. FileTrail handles physical records, which, I think we have Freeport back around that's currently using FileTrail. It's a great solution, and they're continuing to expand on it. It works well with SharePoint. We implemented that solution, and our records management team saved so much time, and they became a more productive team because the information was easy to locate in the system. And just a side note about FileTrail, we also implemented RFID technology. So if anyone's looking to try to do something like that in their organizations, it's great. It worked wonders. We were able to locate missing items within the fraction of time it would take calling someone to try to figure out where this information went. Then we found KnowledgeLake. I was actually talking with my sales rep with FileTrail, saying, do you guys know anybody out there that does this type of content management? He said, yeah, we know KnowledgeLake. I've never heard of them. So I reached out to them, and I discovered they had a ton of products that integrate well with SharePoint that not only allows you to take your electronic content, but also your physical content and get it into the same place, which was great because, we had emails that we wanted to get over into SharePoint. Well, if you know how SharePoint works, you have to go to the library, find the location, add the document to the library. So there's many steps involved. When you're thinking of an end user, you want to make something that's easy to do. And the tool that KnowledgeLake had called Connect was really simple and straightforward, and they actually gave us a tool that you can integrate with your email. That's just a one-button click. You say, move this to SharePoint, it knows exactly where to put it. You put in a couple of information about the document if you want to, but the interesting thing about email is that it's going to capture that header information. So who it's from, when it was sent, received, subject, all that's going to be captured. So it's just a simple click and it puts it where it needs to go. And they, of course, they have a lot of other great tools, which I'm pretty sure you guys have heard about. So we've done this in different phases. So my CEO, or my interim controller, came to me and said, Ronald, we need a solution. I want it yesterday to be able to allow people to approve invoices that are offshore. Because we were looking at sometime 30 to 60 days for invoices to get to the rig location, get approved, and get back to us before we can pay them. It was causing a real bottleneck, and our aging report was, creeping up. So to do this, I said, okay, give me 2 weeks to build a process that would be simple enough to actually take a physical piece of paper, scan it, have it, the user input some data, who it needs to go to, and be able to route it to the system. Once the person that I routed to received it, they approved it, and it got sent back to the originator. Once I implemented that process, they got an invoice in. Within a couple of hours, it was approved. Saved so much time, and the CEO and the executive management were very impressed with the process. They said, okay, let's move forward with the full implementation of invoice approval processing. So that kind of takes us into the full solution phase. Excuse me, one moment. So with going into the full implementation phase, it took a little bit longer. But the good thing is that I already had the solution kind of built for the first phase. I just needed to expand upon it, to put in some different variables based upon requirements. One of the things that was a requirement was the duplication check. We had a lot of times where invoices, sometimes they would get put into the system twice. So we needed some way to be able to check this information to make sure it was only getting put in once. So we were able to do that. We needed something that integrated with our accounting system. Black Elk currently uses OGIS as an accounting system, so we had to find a way to make that work. We also needed, of course, a delegation of authority. For offshore, we needed multi-tier approval. So if it went to a platform supervisor, based upon their approval limits, it would need to route to someone else to do that. And to create these different approval levels and delegation of authority, if you're familiar with SharePoint, you can actually use a SharePoint list to do this. So you don't have to go out and build an Excel document, build a Word document. You can put it in a list, which means you can control it from a approval standpoint, who can access it. And so it became one of the tools that we use for auditing. Who changes it, who does what to it. And it's one of the things that our third-party auditing company now accepts as legal auditing document. And we also did document image retrieval. Now, with that, we needed to keep in mind that our auditors do come in at some times and need to be able to retrieve certain documents, or if someone calls down and says, I need to get a certain document, how this process works. But the other cool, neat thing that my company really liked, and if you guys all heard about the incident that Black Elk had with the platform explosion, and as you know, when you go to that type of situation, you need a lot of documents, right? So what we did, we used the KnowledgeLake and SharePoint tool to go into our system. Since all of our documents are stored in SharePoint, I created a query using KnowledgeLake tool to actually pull out all documents related to the event, and I put them on a network location. Doing this, the search took, no kidding, 5 minutes to do. They had all the documents they needed. We could do an FTP transfer to our legal entity, saving time of copying, having man hours spent, getting a consulting firm to come in to do all the different work. It was very easy done, and it saved tons of costs when it came to doing this type of work. So, for the delivery, we had to, of course, scan and route the invoices, which we did. So, why did we implement KnowledgeLake? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we had a high aging report. We were looking at sometimes, I'm embarrassed to say it, but it happens. We had a couple things that were 180 days plus. Because they got lost in the system, they were sent offshore, someone lost them. It just created a nightmare, in fact. Missing and lost invoices, we had duplication. So when you don't pay one invoice, you get another one, and it just causes a trickle-down effect. So you're paying multiple invoices. Okay, so what this did for us, it definitely took our approval time. As I mentioned earlier, we had 60 days. We went down to 7 days approval time. So now, this was offshore. In the office, it was even less than that. Because you would get an alert that, hey, I have an invoice to approve, you can go right in and approve it. And so it saved a lot of time. You didn't have to worry about packing invoices home with you. You didn't have to worry about them getting lost, misplaced. You didn't even have to worry about, okay, well, this is not my invoice. I need to take it down to the my supervisor down the hall. No, you can just do it from your machine, reroute it. They got it. One of the things that my CEO wanted when I sat down and talked with him was, we need to make sure that the right people are approving the right invoice. Because sometimes you can turn, we use Nintex Workflow, which has a feature, I'm going to get it wrong because I'm in the transition with K2, so forgive me, which is lazy approval, which basically means that you can actually send an email, you can attach it, and a person can respond with an action such as approve, reject, delegate, and it will take action on that. Well, he didn't want that. He wanted to make sure that the person was actually opening the invoice, making sure the charges were legit, and we're just not paying a random invoice just because we got it. And we also reduced the number of missing and lost invoices because there were none. Because all those invoices were scanned, they were controlled when they came in, they were scanned. There were no more. You're going to see a slide later when we implement it in phases as what happened with our number of invoices as they came in. So was the juice worth the squeeze? In my opinion, it was definitely worth it. It saved so much time. So this is when we implemented our invoice solution. We started with phase 1 in April and May. So as you can see, when we first started, we did it something small. We wanted to make sure, okay, is this going to work for us? Are users going to become adopted to this process? And we did. And they were very adoptive. So they were like, yes, we want this. We've been waiting for this. We need this. Let's do it. I said, okay, well, let me go back and build that phase 1 full process. So I did. I went and I implemented the full process. Now, to implement the full processes, I did engage KnowledgeLake product service team to help me construct the workflow. Now, this was the first time I was going to build a workflow of this magnitude, but working with them, they helped me guide it through the process and made it so easy. And one of the things I like about the product software team, service team, was they were able to say, okay, Ronald, what do you want to do? Okay, I want to do this to help reduce costs, keep costs down, so that your product doesn't have scope creep. We also use another consulting firm to help build workflows. Now, these workflows were not a part of the invoice approval, but they did things such as, I want to send a daily report to a approver, say, hey, you have 25 outstanding invoices, and here are all the invoices that are outstanding. I want to be able to send an alert to an AP clerk that says, hey, this invoice is now being approved, or this invoice has been rejected, and here's why. And so we had to build Nintex and allow that to do it, and it worked well. What I did with the alerts, because you know how sometimes people say, I never got the email? Right. I never got it. What I did was I created a document library, and I put in, every time that email is sent out, send me a copy. So it sent me a copy to a document library where I put some, of course, retention policies around it. Says, delete this email within 90 days. But it allowed me to go back through and say, no, I see that you received it, and it said that you had 5 invoices on there. So it made our approvers more responsible for their work. But as going into this in June, we did a full implementation of the software. So you can see it gave us almost 4,000 invoices. Well, each month we reduced that because we were no longer getting duplicate invoices, which is great. In October, we started a drilling program, so we got some more invoices in. But you can see in November, December, everything just went way down for the number of invoices that were coming in. We were getting stuff paid a lot faster. We were getting less duplicate invoices, and we're becoming more efficient and productive team. Okay. So when we talk about increased productivity and cost effectiveness, we saved a lot of time, 25%. I'll be honest with you, when we implemented this process, it kind of caught me off guard because I wasn't ready for the influx of work that was going to be needed for this. So what happened was, when we went to this process, we were all unprepared for the number of invoices that were going to be returned, how fast the process was going to move. So this created a kind of, okay, well, here are your invoices, paper, because you no longer send them, what do you do with them? Things are being improved in the system so fast, we have to kind of, okay, let's step back, let's create a retention policy for all these different documents. Make the process a lot faster. We were able to, of course, adjust to it so that it wouldn't cause any ripple effect with the process. We sped it up 35%. It blew the socks off of the AP clerks. They were like overwhelmed. Why am I getting so much work? Oh, surprise, surprise, huh? And of course, the return on investment, I can't even speak for knowledge. Like, it saves so much time and money. The cost savings that you get from this solution is great. It saved us so much that we were able to, of course, implement other solutions that would go on top of this, such as we decided from our standpoint to actually begin externalizing all of our SharePoint content. Now, of course, when you start scanning a lot of stuff to SharePoint and documents, your SQL databases are going to grow exponentially. And that's one of the things that we ran into. It was we went from an hour backup to maybe 3 or 4 hours backup time. And so that created a nightmare for me when I needed to restore anything. So I needed to externalize the content, and it took my database content sizes way down. My backups nightly were about 30 minutes. So, lessons learned. What we did right was, I wanted to make sure that everyone in the company was aware of what we were doing. So I kind of blasted out emails to everyone, hey, this is what we're doing. We're getting ready to implement this process. If you have any questions, I created documents. I held go-to meeting sessions just to make sure that everyone was ready for what was going to happen so no one was caught off guard. We prioritized the change management. So when you're going into a project, as you know, we had to make sure that, okay, well, what's the first thing we need to do? And the first thing that we did was we needed to come up with a taxonomy, which was very challenging. I don't know if anyone has ever tried to get naming conventions in your company one way. Yeah.
Oil and gas business has no problem with naming conventions.
So we did that, and we developed a taxonomy. Now, one of the things, best practices, is when you're going out creating your taxonomy for a document, we'll say an AP invoice, make sure that you only get the information that is relevant. Don't try to overdo it, because if you overdo the information, the users are going to not want to put that information in. One of the other cool things that we did was we linked this up to our ERP system, and we were able to go in and extract the information using the KnowledgeLake tool. So when a user puts in a voucher number, they hit enter, it automatically populates that data so that the user no longer has to enter the data. They just have to verify that the data is correct, which saved a lot of time. What we did wrong, of course we waited too long to implement. I can tell you this, we purchased the solution in the end of 2010. We did not implement the solution, our solution, until about April of 2013. So we waited a little bit too long to get it done. And that was because we were going through trying to get management and our accounting department to see the value of it. The first part I actually wanted to start with HR, but when you get with each department, it's kind of what they said earlier. You have these data silos, and you have people are very protective of their data. If you come and you say, "What, you're trying to change my process?" I don't know about that. So you have to kind of ease them into the process and show them how the value can actually be won over, which is what I did. My boss called it winning small fires. So I created some different champions, and I went to each department and said, okay, look, this is what we can do for you. Let me do it, and I'll show you what the value would be. One of the biggest things we've done is from our AFE perspective. We actually put all of our AFEs inside of SharePoint, so that way it saves a lot of time when someone's searching, or, hey, what's the status of this AFE? You can go and search for it, and you'll see, okay, 2 partners have responded, we're still waiting for a third. It reduces your time from your land person having to actually figure out, okay, well, let me look at it, what's going on, let me send you a copy. Our process before was we had 3 different people that needed copies of AFEs. So we were creating so much paper that it was ridiculous. As I mentioned earlier, we did eventually implement the externalization project, but we failed to develop it at the beginning. So it created a kind of an influx of data on our SQL server. So we had to make sure that we can manage that and increase bandwidth. It was definitely for going offshore. And retention plans, we didn't have one. No one thought it was necessary. We don't need that. What do we need it for? Well, as we mentioned earlier, that you need to reduce your legal liability, of course. You don't want to be caught with something that's 10 years old, but that can still be submitted upon evidence. So what I did is I went in, I developed different plans, starting with AP, identified, okay, we have, I call them content types. We have 10 different content types. Let's say, how long can this one live? Where does it live? When does it go? So we use FileTrail to say, okay, here's the paper documents. They're going to be held in this location for a period of 1 year. After 1 year, they're going to be destroyed. But we'll still have a record that it was destroyed, that we actually had the evidence. So, that's a lot of details I mentioned earlier, and I didn't want to kind of bore you with a lot of information, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the process, about what you're thinking about doing, anything that you see about lesson learned that's not up there. I know one of the biggest things for me was we transitioned AP managers during the middle of the process. They say IT people are divas. No, I think AP people are divas. The AP manager came in and wanted to revamp the entire process. And so we had to do that. So one of the things to be aware of is to make sure that you have something that says we're not going to do change management where you have to rebuild the entire process.
All right.
Did you guys stay on 2010 or did you upgrade to 2013?
We did not upgrade. We stayed on 2010 because I think at the time, KnowledgeLake was not yet ready to support 2013, so we had to remain on 2010.
Oh, Ron?
Yeah.
Can you touch more on the taxonomy and file structures and how you coordinated all that?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, the way I did this was I went to each department. I had a meeting first with each department champion and said, okay guys, let me explain to you what managed metadata taxonomy is, so that way you understand what it is and you can help me build it. And everyone said, okay, so the slide presentation was about 5 slides. I explained what it is, what I wanted to do. And I told them, think of it like this. So you have a document that you're saving in a file location, right? If you put it in different folders, that's your taxonomy right there for that document. It's a lot easier to do. And so they did that. And I took an example for the AP document. I said, okay, well, here's the invoice. What information do we need? Let's highlight the information. And so we did that activity, and they seen it. They're like, okay, now what don't we need out of the information that we highlighted? Because you want to reduce. When you start getting into more like land and legal, you get to a situation where you can't exactly have the information populated from the back-end system. This has to be keyed in. So you have to make sure that you're only doing 5 to make sure that you're staying at a very high level of information. We did it a series of different ways. With the KnowledgeLake tool, you can actually, if you get the capture, no wait, is it capture? Yes, the capture solution. If you're going into a document, you can actually select it by right-clicking, and you can tell it, well, this is what this document is, or this is what this content is. So if it's a contract, here's my legal person for this contract. So it saves a lot of time with having to type or key in information.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do you mind sharing the size of your content database or your AP library? At what point did you decide to move the content into the block storage?
Okay. Yes.
You want to repeat the question, just because we got the fan blowing here, in case anybody couldn't hear that?
Sure. She is asking, or Peggy is asking, about the size of my content database for using the AP process, and at what point did I decide that I needed to externalize this data? So, the size of my content database had grown to 115 gigabytes.
115?
Yes, 115 gigabytes. And what I was doing is actually, I was scanning the documents at the lowest resolution. They were all black and white documents. Very, very small documents, but we had so many documents that it grew. Microsoft's recommendation is I believe 100 gigs. If your database reaches 100 gigs, then you have a problem. So I took action because I didn't want to cause any performance issues with using the software.
And just add to that, with 2010, obviously that was probably one thing to address as well.
Yeah, content database, I'll add again, the content database sizing and externalization. The best practices are going to vary based on what version of SharePoint you're running, the SQL Server resourcing, and what your DR backup sort of scenarios look like, retention. I mean, talk about an onion. That's a big one, resourcing. So, but that's a great. So at 100 gigabytes, you started to say, and then how did you go about doing the externalization?
So I engaged another company, which I'll do a lot of research before I actually reach out to the company. As you guys, I attend events like this that actually introduce those companies for me. I actually went to one that KnowledgeLake had hosted, and they introduced me to MetaLogics, which was a great software application. I used them to externalize my content because it made it a lot easier. It integrated with SharePoint. I didn't have to spend much time training or learning how to use the application, and so I decided to go with it.
And I'll just shameless plug. We're also a MetaLogics partner, so it's a good tool.
So did you OCR UAP?
I did not, because there's really no need to, because we're capturing the metadata. If you configure your search correctly, you can actually search using that data, so there's no need to OCR. I did OCR my contracts and legal documents, which was another issue because they were really large documents.
So if there's, we'll continue to take questions for Ron, but Scott's going to kind of just step in as moderator and also help if there's any questions more broadly for the panel. In addition, I know Ron talked a lot about AP, and there were several questions in the audience about well files, lease files, other types of sources of paper in the enterprise, and so just open up to any questions like that, and if not, we're going to have Scott make up some questions.
So are there any other questions before I go ahead and jump in?
And we're going to go ahead and let them bring the meals on in, and
Yeah,
we'll
so
just
the food's coming in if that was the question.
when do we get our lunch?
My question is, are you able to pull data from like IHS and because if you wanted to populate instead of having to type all that in, pull all your wells or information in.
So the question is, can you pull in data from external sources like IHS?
Yeah, there's actually a number of ways to do that. Sorry, I'll stand up. It's kind of weird talking into a bunch of heads. Is with the capture side, there's what we call more of a crawl, walk, run, right? So if you were to crawl, right, just the simplest form of technology, key from entry, maybe do some rubber banding, etc. Next step would be to, configure some database lookups. So in the SharePoint world, right within that content type, you can configure lookups to pull from your SQL, your DB2, your Oracle databases. And that's not necessarily application dependent. So as we look at many organizations that have many different specifics, especially in oil and gas, we find that there are so many, even if they're under one umbrella, called P2 or something, they're still not organically grown. They're glued together somehow. So we're able to point to all those different applications and populate that database lookup. Now, running, we start talking about auto classification, automatic OCR, more full production capture scenarios. So if we go into a customer and Black Elk invoices, stuff, I mean, they really don't do a ton of volume, so that you look at it and you say, well, how much value could you gain by implementing what would be technically a more complex solution? But for the larger cases where they're pumping through some volume, we can provide that auto classification, so no barcodes, right? Intelligently reading documents and separating them, and then recognizing it's an invoice, and here's the line items, and here's the footer information, etc., to streamline that process and ultimately either reallocate your headcount or reduce it. But it's totally dependent on the application that we're implementing. So
I'll add, speak to the oil and gas specific question around IHS. Are you talking about field direct in this case? Or,
I can't
Can you
remember
stand up,
what.
Nate?
sorry, Is there a specific IHS application that you're talking about, for example? Like Field Direct or Interdeck data? Yeah, so what we do as the integrator is the product has the capability to do this integration, and what we do is help you map from where your systems of record are for these different attributes into the knowledge lake capture process. So at what point in the process should you pull in this attribute? Another thing that Mike didn't mention is that you can capture from within a line of business application. So let's say, for example, you have your lease screen up and you want to add a lease. If the data is already filled out on that screen, and you use the Unify product, which is an integration that allows you to place a button on that screen. So if you're in Bolo or P2 or something like that, and you're on a screen and you want to add a document, it can pull all the values off of that screen and automatically label the document based on how that gets wired up. So as part of the implementation, we help kind of map those data sources into the fields that Mike was just describing.
Another really nice feature with that integration, when you're pulling from a system that has got just tons of values in it that you're pulling back, the out-of-the-box SharePoint integration is really hard to navigate through millions of items. The KnowledgeLake data set comes back in a much more user-friendly format where, starting to type is going to pull those items back for you instead of you scrolling through millions of records. So that interface is actually a lot nicer as well.
Good question.
Are there other questions?
Does the KnowledgeLake unified module integrate with Excalibur?
That's a great question. I'll openly admit I don't know the answer to that right now.
I would love to know.
So the integration of this unified tool is a presentation layer integration, meaning you don't have to have an API hook in the particular line of business application. So what it does is it actually bolts into the user interface in Windows, right? As opposed to having to talk to, so for example in Excalibur, the Unidata database, right? Very difficult to integrate with. And there are very few applications that can actually do that for reasons that are too technical to get into in this audience. But if you have questions afterwards, I could go into more technical detail. But because of the way it's designed, you really can layer it on top of anything that comes up in a Windows and a web-based application. So, dare I say it, we see the oil and gas world starting to use software as a service models more. They're still not pervasive, but they're being used more. And one of the other challenges that we have in an integration world is how do you use a system that the database not even in my servers? So that's another really cool thing is they have the ability to integrate with a web-based application just like they do with the Windows-based application because it sits in the user interface layer, not in the database layer. Now, you basically have both options. You can integrate through the user interface, pulling attributes out of a particular screen or layering buttons. So for example, I'll just use the lease screen again. You've got Bolo or Excalibur, you've got your lease screen up. There's a field that says the lease ID. The integration would actually place a button to the right of that field, so for example, or maybe in the title bar or wherever you decide to put it. This is part of the implementation process, is defining all this. But you might say, okay, I want the first option if I click on that button to be view lease. And what it does is automatically pull the lease based on that metadata field from the repository and render it on the screen. The next one might say view all related documents. So it might pull the lease and then maybe some assignments and whatever else you have in the file that's related to that source document. So, and then you can configure it to run a search for everything with this text in it. So you can have it automatically shortcut to SharePoint, automatically shortcut to pulling up documents to review them, right? And so the shortcuts are actually configurable as part of the implementation process, and you define what you want these integrations to do. So that's the long answer is yes, it can integrate with Excalibur in a number of different ways. Whether or not you have ESTU to push the Excalibur data to SQL, again, it's going to open up different options, but ultimately the answer is yes, it can integrate with Excalibur.
Are there any other questions?
We'll keep doing
Yeah,
this sort of
keep going.
groundhog up and down.
I feel like somebody needs to have a mallet. Oh, your time's up.
So Ronald, I actually had a question for Ronald. You presented the solution you ended up with, SharePoint, the file trail, and KnowledgeLake. What were the other solutions you were considering, and why did why did they basically not win out over these?
So other solutions we were considering, for imaging, we were looking at dock view, which is a great solution, but unfortunately it didn't work well with our ODIS solution. We were looking for something, that's going to grow. So if you decide to change solutions and go to a different accounting system, you don't want to have to spend so much time trying to reinvest in your imaging application. You know, one of the things with KnowledgeLake is I can set up something within 10 minutes using any system, as Nate just mentioned, from integration-wise. So it saves so much time. Other systems I was looking at were not really related with SharePoint. They were off base. There wasn't too many applications that integrated with SharePoint, so they were not worth looking into or even mentioning.
This is actually a question, I'll kind of open it up to the panel, someone can jump in. Why do most of these type of projects stall, or what are the reasons why these type of projects stall or fail? What have you seen, both from, you can speak to your own experience, or you can speak from the experience you've seen with clients? And I'll open it up.
We could probably all speak to that from different perspectives. I mean, you mentioned a couple things on your last slide. You want to start, Ron, and we could just probably all chime in on that.
Sure. So why these things stall out? My project was at a point where it was about to stall out. And we're all friends here, so I'm going to be honest with you. At the time, we
didn't agree on the honest part. That wasn't in the script, Ron. No, I'm kidding.
We had an accounting officer, chief accounting officer, head of accounting. So we told her about the process, and she knew about it, but she insisted that she was too busy to be involved in the process. So we moved forward because this was coming from the CEO as well as the fund investors wanted this solution put in place. So we had to move on this. So what we did was we moved forward, and we got to a certain point where she said, stop. No, we're going to do it this way because this is what it's always worked. This is my process. This is what we're going to do. So then it became a tug of war between accounting, IT, and management. So what I had to do was go in to try to appease everyone, is reinvent the process and kind of tweak it a little bit to do what she wanted it to do. So after we made the modifications, the project continued, but it was a slight stall because of that situation.
I'll speak from a software kind of vendor perspective, and to give you guys a little insight, essentially my entire career has been based in the SharePoint world and imaging. So 6+ years now, all the way back to 2003 in SharePoint to now, this is what we've been doing. And I look back at it, and I can tell everyone in this room, technology has never, ever held up a project. Meaning there wasn't something that technology couldn't accomplish. It wasn't something that people hold up projects. I hate it, but it is what it is. And most of the times, what he's experiencing internally is that we'll work with an organization, we'll work with IT. Somebody will reach out to us and say, I have SharePoint, I'd love to work it. They're oftentimes open to help us meet people, but it's education and having people thoroughly educated on what is possible and how it's going to help them so that they buy in. And then also helping provide them a framework to get it done, which is oftentimes held up in taxonomy and planning. I mean, I see that a lot where people get caught up in their taxonomy and they go from functional to what legal wants. And if you get stuck in what legal wants and can't get legal to buy into functional, essentially you're going to have an RFP that comes out that says we have to be DoD compliant, we have to be this, we have to be that. And those companies rarely, if you go into a room and ask about records management, how many people have to be DoD compliant? You might get a couple government people. And then how many people have actually implemented a DoD compliant system? And I've done this in federal, actual, symposiums, kind of like this. Maybe 2% of the people raise their hand. And out of that, then it comes back to what's a functional, usable system. And that always starts with the user and not necessarily IT. So that's my lessons learned. And fortunately, we see it happen. And then fortunately, I've at least learned to sometimes navigate those waters with my clients to help make it happen. So.
I'll add a couple things to that. I think one thing is in the taxonomy world, you know, you want to empower people to be self-service, but if you haven't worked enough with the technology and the different aspects of the business, it can be hard to really map out taxonomy if you're doing it for the first time and you see it just through your kind of keyhole view of your own organization. I think also not properly right-sizing the method through which you do the acquisition. One thing we talked about is people say, we have to have 1200 DPI full color scans because we have scanners that can do that. So why wouldn't we use this capability, right? And until they looked at the amount of disk space and OCR CPU time that it takes to process that kind of image load, and they have it properly resourced, they don't want to go buy the number of CPUs worth of the server that they need to process that load, and they have, you know, their image acquisition load looks like this, right? They take on a project, they do an acquisition, or they open a new facility or whatever, right? And they have to take on a new load, and all of a sudden their OCR time just balloons, brings their servers down to the ground, it's crawling. And so I think right-sizing that type of imaging, I think that's an easy gotcha, and I think users see 1200 DPI full color and they go, and they're like, we got these really cool scanners and they can do this. And they don't think about the downstream impact of taking on that really high-grade image data, and thinking about, okay, from a right-sizing perspective, what type of review are these images going to need to support, and do we really need, you know, granular zoom that a 1200 DPI full-color image is going to give us on a page-by-page basis if you think about the order of magnitude greater size constraint, right? And that's not just size on disk space. You say, oh, we got a huge SAN. Well, okay, but that image file has to move into and out of memory every time you load that stuff. It has to get compressed and decompressed. All of that takes CPU time. The OCR engine has to process that image. That's that much more memory it has to chomp through. The pagination back and forth from disk into memory. So it's not so simple as just like the end user experience, which is when that thing does finally render, it'll be gorgeous, right? But we really are thinking about this as really a business case, and I think so. That's another thing. I think that that can be clobber you after the fact, because the workflow's great, the taxonomy's good, and then you clog the system with these overly beautiful scanned images. And then I think just as Mike said, you know, the people aspect of the project aren't properly managed. So especially from a change control perspective, I don't think we see projects that either don't have the right executive support, or they're not starting with the user's perspective in mind. I think a lot of you guys represent user communities. We have some from IT here, maybe a 50-50 shot here. I applaud all of you guys coming and representing your user communities, because if there's not a so what to an end user, then there's no motivation to change. And I think that you know, if you're going to go change the way someone does their job, you need to be able to return to them in a very short period of time. You need some short-term ROI to each of those users as to how is this better? What part of my life got easier because you made this other part harder? Meaning, you know, I used to be able to click once and pull it off a network share, right? That's sort of the illusion of the productivity of a network, of a Z drive, is I can just open up File Explorer and go right to the file, and I know right where all my stuff is. But over time, you think about the way that you store those files and how they're not searchable, they're not indexable. You only can put them across one type of taxonomy. You can't cross-reference. So people don't think about the so whats of the business, and they're just like, but it has these features, and features ultimately don't make projects successful, right? There has to be a give back to the business. So
Another item that Nate always says is don't let perfect get in the way of good.
yeah, that's sort of like also what Mike was saying around, you know, legal would want to have a perfect taxonomy, and a lot of times that last mile of really good to perfect, you can get stuck right there. And you never get live. It's better to cut features, get live, experience some ROI. So a lot of times what the project team thinks the right solution is, until you put it in the hands of the users, you don't know. you think you know, you have a theory, it worked on the whiteboard, right, in the clean room, it totally tested out, and the 3 sample users that you had gave it their sign off. But when you hit the 300 users that 3 is a representative subset of, they have aspects of their workflow and their process that you can't know. And until you put something out there that's real, that's tangible, that they can get their arms around, you're not going to know where the shortcomings are, and there will be things that you missed. And so not letting that perfect clean room install get in the way of put it out there, field test it, get some validation from the actual user community. So I think that's really the big change, is rather than thinking about it, IT is going to build a perfect solution, then we're going to wait till they see how cool this is, starting with the users and work your way back into the IT. Like what's the change, what's going to sell it to these users, and then how do we implement that for them, rather than how do we get them to sign off on the technology project that we want to do. Right.
Nate, actually, since you're up, I'll kind of go to you on this one. So the larger project for Black Elk was going to be also going to include HR. It was going to start including the land files. I guess if we kind of project out, how different do you think the experience is going to be from doing an AP solution to start adding these additional things? How is, do you have to is it just get in, roll your sleeves up and learn? How is that whole experience going to look or feel like as you're going through it?
I'd say there's a couple of differences at a high level. I'll also let Ron speak to this, but he mentioned a couple things. One is that the workflows are more complicated. Mm-hmm. He mentioned that in his talk. Outside of AP, even AP may have some bifurcated approvals or some layering. The metadata is simple. You don't necessarily need the OCR, and it depends on what type of invoicing we're talking about and what sort of search ability you want. But I think as you move into, especially lease records, well files, you want a lot more fidelity on the information. The workflows get more complicated. There's more steps. The line of business systems get more diverse. With AP, typically you might have 1 or 2. You might have an AFE and an ERP, right, that has the cost data in it, or the voucher system in it, right? Typically that's 1 or 2 systems. But if you move into the line of business, your source system of data gets a lot more diverse. You might have different asset teams that in a larger organization that have different systems. You might have workflows that vary by geography. On our onshore, lower 48, we do this. On the North Slope, we do this. And in the Gulf of Mexico, we do this. And in the North Sea and in West Africa, we do this. So you get a lot more variety as you move into the line of business from the back office, which tends to be much more standards driven. And that's just an order of magnitude level of complexity difference and planning and process mapping and things like that. You don't have as many. Ron is really good, so he makes this, he's got his 10 minutes and he's got the solution there. I would say that there probably are some processes out there that aren't solvable in 10 minutes, even if you're as good as Ron.
I agree.
And that's what you see more of as you move outside of the sort of from APM. You want to add anything to that, Ron?
Yes. So moving forward, the interesting thing about my position was I was kind of the business systems analyst. So I got to see all the different data that came in. So that exposed me to be able to say, okay, I'm going to go do something for this department, but let me keep this in mind of how it will translate over. So if you're dealing with accounting, yeah, you code stuff to locations, right? Well, these locations transform to what they use in land and legal. So let me build it this way, and that way I can make sure the data remains the same moving forward. So that way when I transition, this is already designed, this is built. All I have to do is just add these different columns to this content type, and I move forward with already pulling the data from my my accounting or financial land and legal system.
Are there any other questions in the audience?
I have a question, which is really the main reason why I'm here today, and I'm not sure whether anybody here in this room would have an answer, but I would appreciate any insight on this. Does anybody have any experience utilizing SharePoint barcoding feature in any format, associated with SharePoint list or SharePoint library? That I'm not talking about a document ID feature, I'm talking about SharePoint barcoding features that can be enabled in a SharePoint list or a SharePoint library. And the reason I'm asking is because that is actually related to our land scanning process. we have information going into our company with the land department being the receiving department of that original information. Those documents, we're talking about the assignments, the lease agreements, etc. These documents were then captured in a SharePoint list by our land tax. And they captured a good amount of metadata associated with the documents. And the documents were routed to records. We have records analysts responsible for scanning those documents. So the barcode is actually the unique ID number that we tie between that SharePoint list and the routing land library. And my question is whether or not SharePoint recycles those barcodes. Because my concern is that the barcodes that are generated by SharePoint, if we delete the item as they are being scanned into the library, the item that is captured in the list becomes obsolete. We really don't have any business reason to keep them forever, because all the metadata will be transferred into the document library and associated with the document scan images themselves. So we would ideally like to delete those items in the original list along with the barcode. The barcode number is the ID. But we're scared that if the barcodes were deleted, SharePoint will recycle the barcodes. And there is maybe one in, hundreds of millions of chance that that barcode will be reused by SharePoint. So does anybody have any?
So just to clarify, so essentially you're hoping to take a list in SharePoint and create your own barcode cover sheets?
That's what we're doing.
So you're creating barcode cover sheets. You're not using doc IDs from SharePoint assigned by SharePoint?
No, because documents need to be captured by the land department first.
They don't exist. So it doesn't exist,
And the land department doesn't want to do the scanning. So the records is responsible for scanning.
What are you using for capture?
We are using the software, we're using Kofax.
So the answer is I can't tell you if SharePoint will repeat or delete, etc. I can tell you that we do have customers that have small custom apps on SharePoint that essentially do create barcode cover sheets. We also have a lot of customers as well that leverage their business applications to do the same, where they'll generate a cover sheet and then use that as part of the scan process.
I think another challenge with, so if you take the Kofax for example, because it keeps its store separate from SharePoint, it's one of the reasons that I would say, if not the key differentiating point about KnowledgeLake is the native SharePoint store. So there isn't a document that's not a SharePoint document, right? So you kind of have that out of the gate. For other solutions that have their own store, there's a synchronization process, and so you've got the challenge that you're describing is multiple IDs for the same entity, and how do you enforce uniqueness over the life cycle of that? So my concern is it's probably more complex than we can cover in a panel discussion, but we're happy to talk a little more, and I'm not sure I fully understand the technical aspects, but we'd be happy to follow up with you offline on that. Does anyone else have specific experience? That's a pretty exotic application.
That is pretty exotic, and usually when I've used barcodes in the past, it's coming off of the content type, so I'm having a difficult time envisioning that it's coming off of your list.
Yeah, it's coming up from the list, and it automatically generates a barcode number for each item in that list.
So it's like a custom column that you've added to the list?
No, it's not a custom column. You enable the list the information policy on the list.
I see, the information policy in the list itself?
Yes.
Okay.
Cool. We'll take that offline.
Yeah.
So, one more question, I think, and for Mike, this one's going to go to you. But Ron had some great, results from this project. And what I want to know is you implement a lot of these projects, you implement an oil and gas and beyond. How do those numbers stack up to what you see with other accounts? Is the juice always worth the squeeze? And because a lot of people here might be thinking about these type of projects, is it really worth the effort? How much do I want to prioritize this over something else? So this is kind of your chance to give an honest assessment of what clients typically see with these type of projects. So as you're starting to think about your business case and how you may want to approach your management to sell these things in.
So essentially your question is, why do people do this?
Well, no,
Why do they invest? So
is the ROI that
Yeah.
Ron showed? I think that's kind of really the question.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
it typical? Is it over? Under? You know, what's a typical kind of?
What can someone expect with a project like this?
Yeah,
is
totally.
it those numbers, or is it?
So I see two types of customers. Imaging's not new. Everybody agree with that?
Yeah.
Early 90s, really, a lot of people made a lot of money when scanners were 20 grand, right? So the technology, the business case is not new. We see two types of customers though, because there's a lot of new companies out there that have you guys are newer, right? Wanting to do it the first time. We see a lot of new companies out there implementing imaging for the first time, and then we see a lot of very large companies that have complex, overly managed, expensive imaging environments today. So two different business cases. The root of a customer that doesn't have an imaging system provides a very different business case than a customer that has 7 different imaging systems and is looking to consolidate that down to SharePoint as a common service platform. So they're much different, right? When you look at just paper to digital, the cost savings, absolutely, right in line with that. I've seen it when we do consolidation projects. It can be even more accelerated because there's different associated hard dollar costs that aren't part of Ronald's environment, right? At that point, they're not paying maintenance for another system. They're not paying all these different things to these different vendors to maintain it. So that oftentimes lends itself to even a more efficient business case because they understand the value of content management, they understand the value of imaging, they understand the value of findability, but now it's how do we do it better with less technology and serve our users in a more effective manner, right? That's actually an easier sell a lot of times than coming into a company that's never done imaging and walking into a VP of Land's office and saying, here is why you shouldn't use paper. And that VP of Land has boxes all over, and you can say anything, and he'll know exactly where something is on that wall. It's hard to convince that gentleman to invest in imaging oftentimes, right? So those are the two different use cases. Both yield different results, and then sometimes you'd be surprised with not just the hard dollar side, but how much efficiency you do gain on the soft dollar side of that coin. Does that make sense, everyone?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone on the panel has a question. I haven't really. You've kind of been taking questions. Are there any more
No,
questions?
I was going to say, hold your thought. So a lot of times, because we're doing a panel format today, the contents run a little bit longer than we normally do. A lot of times we like to just open up and let tables discuss because kind of teeing up an issue gets people thinking, and you'll find that we know some stuff, but even at your tables, your peers are sitting right across from you, and they're going to know some stuff too. And they each bring their own experiences, and that there's a lot of value just discussing in the room here. So I don't want to, if there's interest, we can keep. Maybe we'll take this as our last question, and then as they bring in dessert, let you guys just discuss it at your tables. And if there's interest, we're absolutely happy to stay after and cover questions as well. One thing also before we take this last question, we're going to come around with surveys. Every lunch and learn we do, we like to get feedback, and actually when we engage with clients, we pass surveys from the first kickoff meeting, when we deliver a milestone, when we deliver the final project, and 90 days after any delivery. So we're big on surveying, getting feedback, how are we doing, how can we improve. Improve everything is one of our corporate values, so we're going to pass these around and ask you guys to before you have your dessert and leave, if you would just give us a little bit of feedback. Actually, here, and pass those out there.
And then just two kind of housekeeping things too. If you need validation on the parking, that's the guy to go see on your way out. You don't have to leave right now. I'm not trying to rush the door. And we also have some bags with one of our energy software outlooks, which is an annual report we created about the energy software business, about best practices and trends, as well as KnowledgeLake collateral and giveaways. So make sure you grab one of those on the way out. And if you want additional outlooks to give to your peers, just reach out to us and we'll definitely get those mailed out to you. But to that point, let's go ahead and kind of do the final question. Did someone have their...
I think Andrew had his hand up there.
So I guess I was just wondering, to do the workflow and the approvals, was there another third-party component that you added to SharePoint, or did you use sort of a, I think, because what I'm looking at is we actually do have DocView. It was kind of there when we started, and people were sort of used to it, but it doesn't work great for the approval process. But I guess ease of approval is a big one. If you're going to start using AFEs for it and stuff like that, a lot of our upper management, they want AFE approval on their phone or wherever it is.
Of course. So what we started off using was Nintex. Nintex is a component that integrates with SharePoint and allows you to build workflows inside of your libraries and lists, reusable workflows. You can schedule workflows. Great tool. However, it does become limiting at what you want to do. One of the things that I kind of work with Mike on is that KnowledgeLake now has a solution with K2. K2 is a more robust solution. So if you're looking to do a little bit more, I would say look at K2. KnowledgeLake has a great solution, which I was actually looking at implementing over at Black Elk, because it does some great things when you're using SharePoint and KnowledgeLake together. When you go in to look at a view, it actually opens the invoice directly inside of the page, so you can see it. And you don't have to worry about going back and forth or building custom views to be able to see stuff. So.
And that's in the K2 where you can...
So, I'll again, another shameless plug, we're also partners with both Nintex and K2, and we implement solutions. These guys, when you SharePoint out of the box does a certain set of things. And if you see a theme here, it's really about using the right tool for the right job, and not trying to say, well, we have one tool and it's a hammer, and we're going to turn every problem into a nail because we're going to use this hammer to solve it, okay? And so the SharePoint product capability has some white space in it, right? Higher end, more advanced imaging capabilities is not one of the capabilities of out-of-the-box SharePoint. KnowledgeLake is a great platform there. Still lets you store everything natively in SharePoint and avail yourself of the whole SharePoint ecosystem of tools like MetaLogics, right, for data migration, content externalization that Ron mentioned earlier, and also K2 and Nintex. Nintex being a little more user-friendly, more kind of draggy-droppy, very low programming quotient, very low technical quotient needed in the user community, but not as technical as K2. SAP integration. They have a solution jointly with KnowledgeLake for more advanced type workflows where they're used to working with the same SharePoint data out of the box. They both integrate with SharePoint natively. So again, as we go in to try and solve a problem, we want to be able to pull out the right tools in the toolbox. And all of these tools do different things. They're better suited for some types of problems, not as well suited for other types of problems. So it's a great illustration of what some of the trade-offs were there. Maybe a round of applause for Ron. Ron, you did a great job today. Thank you so much for being here. Ron was only paid a small amount. No, I'm kidding. Ron didn't receive any compensation except he likes to talk and is active in user communities in several of the different kind of tool domains. And thanks a lot for being here today. And I'm sure that Ron and Mike are hungry because they've not had lunch. So maybe what we'll do is kind of finish the panel aspects here. Let these guys start their lunch as you guys are wrapping up. And if there's any questions, feel free to grab someone. There's a couple of entrance folks out in the audience as well. If you have questions, let us know. Thanks very much for being here, and y'all have a great week.